One of the themes that's woven through the scriptures right from the beginning until the teachings of Jesus is the concept of hospitality. Hospitality, if you were to go into the Middle East even today, but hospitality is absolutely the greatest virtue. And any violation of hospitality is absolutely the greatest sin. And it comes partially from the fact they live in such a harsh environment that if people don't take care of one another, no one survives. So that hospitality has become a particular art, and a particular thing that rests on every one of them there is very significant. The first story is the story of Abraham, who entertains 3 guests. As the story goes on, we're going to discover ultimately those 3 guests are in fact the Holy Trinity. That God comes to him in the form of these 3 gentlemen, and they're passing by, and Abraham invites them in for the meal. The obligation of hospitality rests on him. They should never have to ask. And so Abraham welcomes them in and offers the hospitality. It's interesting, I think, to look at the reasons for hospitality. In the Mideast, it began as a thing with survival. If there was no hospitality, people wouldn't survive. The next step, as you see developing in the scriptures, is the idea that you never really realize the significance of a person when you're talking to them at one time or another, and that you have the opportunity to entertain significant people, and oftentimes don't find out about it until later. I think every one of us at one time or another has had an encounter with a person that we later found out was more significant than we knew at the time. Hopefully it wasn't a problem. I'm reminded of a story that took place when I was in Hawaii. There was a man in the diocese, a Monsignor, and a native Hawaiian who was very, very significant in the diocese and a rector of a very large parish. And everyone was absolutely convinced in the diocese that he would be the next bishop. He more convinced than anyone, I might add, but everyone was relatively convinced he would be the next bishop, so that there would be a native Hawaiian. And the nuns who worked in his parish were the Sisters of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. Damien, the leper, was a member of that community as well. But anyway, they're from Belgium, and they're a strong order in the diocese. And they were taking care of the school. One of the sisters came over and said her brother was visiting from Belgium and asked if her brother could stay in the rectory. And the Monsignor decided that it was probably inappropriate for the brother of one of the nuns to be staying in the rectory, and encouraged her that they should use one of the guest rooms in the convent rather than the guest suite in the rectory. So that's what they did. And only after the man arrived did he discover that the brother of the sister was Archbishop Jadot, who was on his way to Washington, D.C. to become the apostolic delegate, whose job it is to appoint bishops in the United States. Very shortly after the Monsignor left the diocese and moved to a whole other diocese and everything. But the idea is you don't know who you'll entertain. And as this story of Abraham concerns, and as we see developing in this text, is that when the Jewish religion came into that context, what they added was the note that you could actually entertain God. You could entertain angels. Not just that you could entertain important people. It could be much more significant. And the curious thing is when Christianity came on the scene, and when Jesus began to teach, Jesus told us that you are always entertaining God. Whatever you do for the least of these, you've done for me. So that hospitality, in many, many ways, is woven into the very fabric of our faith. And if you were to look at certain religious orders, like the religious order, I'm thinking of the Benedictines, the whole heart of their community is hospitality. The way they deal with one another, the way they deal with visitors, the way they deal with people around. But to understand this hospitality, this idea of welcoming, it begins with a relationship with people, and it ultimately is a relationship with God. The person who is not welcoming to people around them ultimately will never welcome God.